Welcome back. We will now be going into the Budget 2 course. In this course, we will cover budget modification, single audit, communication with auditors, and closeouts and reporting. My name is Dean Astorino. I'm a CPA and a senior accountant at Cuyahoga Community College, and this current module will cover budget modifications. Specifically, we're going to look at what the uniform guidance says in revising your budget. There is not a whole lot of prior approval needed, but we're going to go through prior approval for budget revisions and when it is required. The first and most important one is when it's resulting in a change in scope or the objective of the project. If you have certain qualifications that you need to meet, such as student numbers or the objectives of the project, which will be located in your GAN, and your budget revision is going to result in a change, you will need prior approval from your project officer in order to be able to modify that budget. Another one is when there's a change in the key person specified in your application or GAN, which was located in the GAN block number 5, called key personnel. This is your project director at your institution, and if their name is on the GAN and you're going to change, it will need prior approval by the Department of Education. In addition, prior approval is needed when you need to disengage the project director for more than a period longer than 3 months or 25% of the allocated time in the GAN. We've covered this several times, mentioned it at least, in several of the budget presentations in Budget 1. Next in the uniform guidance is when the Department of Education, you need to refer to Subpart E in the uniform guidance for any inclusion unless waived by the Department of Education in that Subpart E. Transfer of funds from participant costs, when you're taking funds away from participant costs, will require prior approval as well. And the definition of participant costs are direct costs for items such as stipends or subsistence allowances, travel allowances, and registration fees paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees, but not employees, in connection with conferences or training projects. Unless specified in the application and funded in the approved federal award, the subawarding, transferring, or contracting out of any work under the federal award would require prior approval. This does not apply to acquisition of supplies, materials, equipment, or general support services. And any budget change that would require prior approval is also when you're changing the non-federal budgeted amount. I mentioned in a prior module on Budget 1 that when you have to be careful when you budget for non-federal money in your budget because your institution is obligated for that money. So it is important that you reach out to your institution and make sure that they budget properly, because when you change that amount, it will need prior approval from your federal program officer. There are situations where the awarding agency, which in this case would be the United States Department of Education, can waive unless explicitly stated in the GAN. It cannot waive approvals for revisions that result in the change of scope or objective, which we mentioned before, but there is a situation where it can allow the recipient to incur project costs in what's known as the pre-award cost 90 calendar days before the award date at the recipient's risk. So that means there's no guarantee your funding is going to be renewed or awarded, but project costs can be incurred up to 90 days if you are awarded. Pre-award costs are allowable and necessary for efficient and timely performance of the scope of work. They're allowable only to the extent that they're allowable if incurred at the date of the federal award. So if they're not allowable under regular federal award standards, they wouldn't be allowed as pre-award costs. But generally, they require written approval of the federal awarding agency, or in this situation, United States Department of Education. Your institution is allowed to initiate a one-time extension of the period of the performance by up to 12 months unless certain conditions are a result. There's situations where in the GAN, the terms and conditions of the federal award might prohibit this extension. There's also situations where it will require additional funds. So obviously, if it's additional costs are going to be incurred and you need additional funding, it is not just allowable. You would need to reach out to your program officer and apply for additional funding. As we mentioned before, in continuing on with this extension, if it results in a change of scope, or if the purpose is just to spend down the remaining funds, you cannot just spend for the sake of spending because you have available budget. It has to be to meet your objectives or goals. So this will conclude the Module 1 on budget modifications in our Budget 2 course. Any questions can be forwarded to Nichelle Knox at Cuyahoga Community College at the email located on this slide. Following this, there will be some questions related to this module. After these questions, we will be back for our second module, which will go over the single audit. So good luck with your questions, and I will see you in module number 2.